Hello, my name is Clemarie Cajias from Nashville Public Library, and this year we're bringing you our Summer Reading Challenge performers virtually. Thank you for pressing play on Friday Family Time. Summer Reading Challenge is going on now. Be sure to sign up by visiting library.nashville.org/summer challenge. You can log your reading minutes throughout the summer and win prizes for hitting your reading goals.
Hey everyone, my name is Lagnajita and I'm a poet here in Nashville, and today I'm coming to you on behalf of the Porch Writers Collective in partnership with Nashville Public Library, and we're going to be talking about sonnets, and not, the dead white guy kind of sonnet, but the modern American sonnet. But I guess in kind of discussing this modern American sonnet, we need to kind of discuss, unfortunately, what a sonnet is and where it came from, and then we'll get into more of the modern sonnet form, specifically Wanda Coleman's American sonnet. And so what is a sonnet, right? Everybody kind of hears this and hears about this form and kind of has a somewhat of an idea about it, but basically sonnet comes from the Italian word for little sound or song, and in the era of open form, the sonnet has come to be a 14 or so line poem which encompasses a mode of thought. Now usually in the past, sonnets have been very romantic, very idealized, very symbolic. There's usually some kind of rhythm involved, such as iambic pentameter if we're talking about Shakespeare. There's usually a question and an answer, or a volta, which signals a turn in the poem. And kind of in discussing, obviously, a sonnet form, one of the most famous Shakespearean sonnets is Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, right? It goes like, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou oust, nor shall death brag thou wanderst in its shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growst. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So obviously the few things you've noticed, it asks a question right at the beginning. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And pretty much it goes on to then answer the question. You've noticed the rhythm structure: may, date, fade, shade, and then throughout each internal line we have this internal rhyme as well, the shall I compare thee to a summer's day, right? And then at the end we have your famous couplet that rhymes. So in talking about that, obviously it's a very classical, mostly this very idealized form, right? And closer to the modernization of poetry, we have a little bit of going against this sonnet form, right? We have people like Robert Frost create this thing called an inverted sonnet. So instead of the question at the beginning, he puts the question at the end, such as in his poem Design, right? He talks about this spider, and by the end he asks, what but design of darkness to appall, if design govern a thing so small. He kept this, rhyme scheme, but he's switching up what the form is, but also he's thinking about not just grand ideas of romance or betrayal. He's talking about this simple spider, just life, right? Now, in kind of departing from that, it is a definition of a sonnet, but I don't think it's always sufficient definition of a sonnet, right? So we're going to talk about Wanda Coleman, who was a Black poet, a Black woman poet, and she kind of invented this new form based off of specifically jazz and other forms of Black music. And so when asked why sonnets rather than ballads, sestinas, odes, villanelles, or any other traditional sonnet form, and if this new form is responding to the history of the form, to Shakespeare or to Petrarch, for instance, she kind of responds and says, she's dabbled in other forms, but writing them feels like pouring new clay into old molds. So she prefers making something new. She prefers the freedom of expression and form that free verse provides, right? So she's using the basic sonnet form, but creating this sense of freedom within the lines, kind of modeled off of the improvisation of jazz, for example. So it's very easy to understand that there's something else going on when it comes to jazz, right? She says that jazz stains whatever it touches, and she comes to the conclusion that it is partly physiological and partly training and influence, partly innate talent. The emotional content of the blues, the oft-erotic rhythms of the makers, the intellectual content of jazz, and kind of the history of it, right? So she calls this the jazz principle, and its musical techniques, and she applies that to free verse pretty much, such as sampling, scatting, vamping, progression. So she applies this musical form to a sonnet form, and because jazz is an open form with properties like progression, improvisation, mimicry, she believes that a jazz sonnet should be as open as possible, right? So she decides it only will be just this loosely 14 to 16 line form, similar to that of the classical sonnet, but within that constraint, she goes crazy, pretty much. And so she gives it more of a jazzified rhythm structure as well, akin to, as she says, the scat tones, similar to some of the beat writers. And in doing so, she creates this new idea for what a sonnet could be, especially in the modern American sense. And because the modern American sense was so structured on Black writing, Black music, Black culture and history, she thinks that we need an updated version of what a sonnet is. So we're going to look at one of her sonnets. This is American Sonnet 35. Boo! Spooky ripplings of icy waves, this umpteenth time she returns, this invisible woman, long, unhaunting, short, on ectoplasm. You're a good man, sister, a lover sighed, Solangago. Keep your oil slick and your motor running. Wretched stained mirrors within mirrors of fractured webbings like nests of manic spiders reflect her ruined mien. Rue wiggles, remorse squiggles, woe jiggles bestride her. Oozy manes spill out yonder, spooling in night's lofty hour, exudes her gloom and spew in rankling odor of heady dower. As she strives to retrieve flesh, to cloak her bones, again to thrive, to keep her poisoned Id alive. Used to be young, used to be gifted, still Black. As you can see, we have a lot of these dynamic sounds, right? Boo. It's a very startling image to start with, but then she repeats that. Boo, spooky, right? The ooh sound. She uses a lot of colloquial language. She says sister or used to be, right? She, within that really interesting phrase, she said rue, wiggles, remorse, squiggles. So we have this internal rhythm, this kind of, syncopated rhythm and idea that kind of keeps the narrative going, right? And we have a lot of those repeated ooh sounds: oozy, spooling, exudes, gloom, spew. And so she's using this kind of very jazzified rhythm structure. She's using quotations, right? She's using lowercase. She's using non-standard spellings, similar to that of the Black arts movement, right? She's also referencing a spider, similar to that Frost poem, right? And she's speaking about blackness. She's talking about being black and what that means. She's talking about this very idealized sense of place, right? This vehicle, this car that's moving. So place pretty much informs and influences all artists. And she has a lot of poems speaking about LA, right? So these kinds of things all come together to come into confluence to describe what she believes is an American sonnet, a sonnet that is based on place and time. So when we're going to keep talking, just think about a place that feels familiar to you. Also, another wonderful idea about the sonnet form is as it was referencing the old classical form, right? And then Frost kind of revamped it and made it his own. And then Wanda Coleman revamped it and made it her own. So this sampling idea that we have going on, or this referencing of the past, we have that in music, right? We have music sampling such that she talked about when it comes to jazz. We have this long lineage of historical tradition. So today I'm going to also talk about Terrance Hayes, who kind of took Wanda Coleman's American sonnet and literally wrote a whole book of American sonnets, very inspired by her work, right? Very close to home. And so he has written several American sonnets, some for Wanda Coleman, some kind of even modernizing what's happening now in America. So he started writing it and finished writing it pretty much during Trump's presidency. And you can kind of get a sense of that history throughout the poems, right? And so we're going to kind of really quickly look at this American sonnet for Wanda C. and then read some more of his work that are more close to what we're talking about. American sonnet for Wanda C. Who I know knows why all those lush-boned, worn-out girls are whooping at where the moon should be, an eyelid clamped on its lightness. Nobody sees her without the hoops firing in her ears because nobody sees. Tattooed across her chest, she claims is, "Bring me to where my blood runs." And I want that to be here, where I am her son, pent in blackness, and turning the night's calm loose, and letting the same blood fire through me. In her bomb's hair, shells full of thunder, in her mouth, the fingers of some calamity. Somebody foolish enough to love her foolishly. Those who could hear no music weren't listening. And when I say it, it's like claiming she's an elegy. It rhymes because of her with effigy, because of her. If there is no smoke, there is no party. I think of you, Miss Calamity, every Sunday. I think of you on Monday. I think of you hurtling hurt where the moon should be and stomping into our darkness calmly. So he is clearly referencing Coleman's definition of the American sonnet, right? The form is issue-driven. He's talking about Wanda in this case. Improvisational, minimalist, fun. The tone is very light-hearted in this particular sonnet, right? So in kind of continuing to understand more of his work, we have a lot of these repeated phrases, repeated images, references to music, references to kind of pop culture even. So this is a a little segment of one of his poems to kind of give you an idea about how you can use place, right? So this is American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. That's the title of this book. That's the title of all the sonnets in the book. And shoulders of parts of Maryland and New Jersey, and the oncoming trains passing inches from head on, headlong, into Newark, where I almost escaped this path, before remembering the thrill, coloring even today's melancholy delay, asleep, awake. So we have these references to, like, place, and in this poem it's very obvious, right? But then we have also this rhythmic structure, right? Head on, headlong, into Newark, where I almost escaped this path. So that is a good example. And then the last poem we're going to be looking at is a great example of more of this rhythm structure that he is employing. Probably ghosts are allergic to us. Our uproarious breathing and ruckus, our eruptions, our disregard for dust, small worlds unwhirl in the corners of our homes after death. Our warriors, weirdos, anti-heroes, our sirs, sires, our sires, sidewinders and whiners, winos, and wonders become dust. I know a few of the dead. I remember my sister's last hurrah. I remember the horror of her head on a pillow. For a long time, the numbers were balanced, the number alive equal to the number in graves. After a long time, the bones become dust again, and the dust after a long time becomes dirt, and the dirt becomes soil, and the soil becomes grain again. The bitter earth is a song, clogging the mouth before it is swallowed or spat out. So yes, this poem is rife with this rhythm pattern, right? Uproarious breathing and ruckus, eruptions, disregard for dust, the sound, right? Small worlds unwhirl, warriors, weirdos, anti-heroes, sirs, sires, our sires, sidewinders, whiners, winos. It's very trap music like, right? We've got some hip hop structures within this. In other poems, he's kind of talked a lot about how trap music becomes a reflection of our modern reality, right? This consumerism or narcissism. And so he's using kind of these musical structures, these repetitive structures, and in other poems, he's using place to kind of really nail down his version of today's American sonnet. So what I want y'all to do is pick a musical genre and reframe this place that we talked about earlier, that you thought about, that resonates with you, right? And write your own modern American sonnet inspired by Wanda Coleman, Terrance Hayes. And so the three components of this sonnet will be issues and place, so what the sonnet is about, rhythms, so places and devices often have them, use your musical kind of inclinations and figure out what kind of rhythms you resonate with, tones, so shadings of attitude, so we have the Wanda Coleman piece to be more, startling. The Terrance Hayes piece before Wanda Coleman is very playful. So kind of come up with a voice or a tone or an attitude that the sonnet is taking on. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, musical taste or preference. So whether it be rock, classical, blues, whatever it is, how to develop pretty much minimal language to simultaneously encapsulate and signal this rhythm structure and this place and this kind of issue that we're talking about. So thank you again to Nashville Public Library and the Porch Writers Collective, and thank you guys for listening. I'm excited to see what y'all come up with.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the Summer Reading Challenge program. Please consider taking our NPL Universe survey. A link is available in the description below. Your feedback helps us create high-quality programs like this one.